The issues affecting you. Revealed, explained, discussed. Now on WGAL 8 in Focus.
Hello, I'm Susan Shapiro. Courtroom dramas and even comedies are popular on television and in the movies, but they don't necessarily give you a realistic look at the judicial system. On this week's WGAL 8 in Focus, we're going behind the bench and talking with the Lancaster County judge to learn what you can expect if you're called to court as a juror, a defendant, or even a plaintiff. We're putting the court system in focus. Joining us now is Lancaster County Judge Jeffrey A. Conrad. He was an assistant district attorney and a defense attorney in Lancaster County before being elected to the bench in 2018. And he now presides over criminal, civil, and drug treatment court. Thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure.
Let's start with juries.
Sure.
A lot of people have been on a jury or not been on a jury. It's supposed to be a jury of your peers, generally 12 people with a couple of alternates. Why is that?
Well, I think that our system really works throughout the years. The jury system has developed into 12. Why 12 is the final number, I'm not exactly sure, but I can tell you this, 12 works and it works well. You put 12 folks in a room and you let them hash it out, and they always seem to come to the right verdict. So again, I'm not sure how that number actually was evolved to be 12, but it works.
A lot of people, I think, have a little trepidation if they are asked to come and possibly be in a jury pool.
When folks receive that summons in the mail, the first inclination, the first thing that they tend to think is, how do I get out of jury service? And to the extent that I can help disavow them of that, I try to do exactly that. And I hope you and I will do that here today.
So a lot of people do try to get out of it?
A lot of people do not want to be a part of the process, and for reasons that don't make any sense. We need good jurors. We need 12 fair and impartial people on these criminal and civil trials. And so I think it's a responsibility of citizens to do their duty. We think about how can you be patriotic? Well, you can serve in the military, but only 1% of our population serves in the military. You could pay your taxes. That's another good way to be, to be patriotic. Well, if you don't pay your taxes, the IRS is still coming after you. What else could you do? Well, you can serve on jury service. And it's something that makes people very proud of the system when they actually get a chance to do it.
It is a civic duty.
It is, truly. Yeah, truly.
Why do you think people want to get out of it? I mean, obviously some people have some obligations that might make it difficult, but are they fearful of the whole system?
I think folks have watched things on TV in other jurisdictions that they're afraid of. I think they're being sequestered, where they'd be taken away from their family for a period of time. I think that just the inconvenience of coming into the courthouse and wondering how long they might be there. It's interesting to find out that rarely is a jury sequestered here, especially in Lancaster County. And again, rarely would somebody be held for more than 3 or 4 days for a trial. They're very short trials in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you say a lot of people, once they do serve, even if they were a little fearful at first, they're happy they did it?
When people walk in, they're so apprehensive. And to the extent that we can assuage their fears, get them to calm down, and let them know that they're going to go home to see their family at the end of the day. They're not going to be sequestered. It's only going to be a few days out of their busy schedules. And also letting them know just how important their service is. We need it. We need good people. If any one of us were charged with a crime or falsely charged with a crime, or if any one of us were victimized, we'd want to make sure we had 12 fair and impartial people to listen to our case. And so it's very important for citizens to know that we need them and the system needs them.
But you say recently you have seen instances where people just don't show up.
It's a terrible statistic, but unfortunately, we have almost a third of jurors don't show up. And unfortunately, no one wants to be rough. I want people to come in because they want to, out of the goodness of their hearts and out of civic responsibility. But if they don't, there are consequences. So if someone's been properly noticed and they don't show up for court, they could face contempt and jail for up to 10 days and a $500 fine. And we've recently had to hold some of those hearings to hold people in contempt if they're not going to show up.
Wow, I'm sure that's not something you want to spend your time doing.
True. And the other thing is, once folks find out that they're potentially going to spend 10 days in jail, it's a whole lot better idea to spend 3 days on a jury than it is 10 days in jail.
All right, well, stay with us. We'll talk more about the jury selection process.
This is WGAL 8 in Focus. Coverage you can count on.
We continue our conversation with Judge Jeffrey Conrad, who's on the bench in the Lancaster County Court of Common Pleas, and you've been there since 2018. So how does the selection process start? I know it starts with a pool of potential jurors.
Right. The pool of jurors is selected from the Department of State, from the Department of Revenue, from the voter registration list, the Department of Transportation. So we draw the names from all around the various state agencies. A list is compiled and a notice is sent out. Once the notice is given to the jurors, they're given a date to report and a questionnaire to fill out prior to coming in. And then we expect them to show up for jury service, where we begin the process then at that point.
So then how is it whittled down to, it's more of a deselection process, isn't it?
It's true.
Yeah.
So we bring in, let's say for instance, we'll bring in 150 jurors. Out of that 150 jury panel, what we'll do then is draw 40, 42, 44 of those and take them up to the courtroom for the jury selection process. And then from that 42, the panel of 42, we'll narrow that down to 12 jurors and 2 alternates for most trials.
Tell people what kinds of questions, I've heard those questions from the defense attorneys and from the prosecutors, that they might ask potential jurors.
Sure. So they ask about whether or not people can be fair and impartial, whether they've ever been victims of a crime before or ever involved in a civil suit. They ask them about, of course, if they have any physical or mental disabilities that would preclude them from being able to sit in the case, and if they have any prejudices that might keep them from being, fair and impartial. Because the bottom line is just simply finding 12 fair and impartial people.
I was going to say, what if they know someone involved with the case?
So if you happen to know someone in the case, you would be excused. That would be what's called a cause strike. Jurors can be struck for a number of reasons. So of the panel of 42, the attorneys have the ability to strike jurors. So they can strike them. In a misdemeanor case, they would have 5 strikes, each of them. And in a felony case, they would have 7 strikes, each one of them. So you'd be striking 10 or 14 people, off the jury panel. And then we also, have a strike for alternates. But for the most part, the attorneys can't strike for age, ethnicity, race, or gender. They can't use that as a reason to strike. But if they didn't like the blouse you're wearing, if they don't like the way your hair is combed today, if they didn't like the way you responded to a question, that can be reason alone for them to use a strike and to kick you off the jury.
How often does that happen?
Every day. Every day that we have them, that process is utilized. And it's very true. I mean, just the way we present ourselves, just the way we respond to questions might give certain indicators about what an attorney is looking for in a jury.
Do they look for, I know there's a lot said about body language.
Very true. There are times, of course, having been a prosecutor and a defense attorney, sometimes you want a happy jury. Sometimes you want an angry jury. So sometimes you're looking through the panel trying to find out, what's this person like? Are they an angry individual? Are they a happy individual? What do I want as a jury? And it's part of the strategy that goes on.
I know for big time trials, there's often consultants for that kind of thing.
There's a science. There are those who would argue that there's a science to jury selection. I may argue against that. I think it's just finding 12 fair and impartial people that I'd be willing to have a conversation with. That normally, because you're going to be having a conversation with the jury throughout the whole entire trial. But there are certainly those that think it's very scientific, and so they bring scientific principles to play. It does happen. I've even myself, as a defense attorney, used a secretary of mine who became very good at handwriting analysis.
Oh.
And she could pick out characteristics of somebody just by the way they wrote. And on the jury questionnaire, you get a chance to see how people write. And so I was looking for an angry jury one time, and she was able to pick out people that kind of had an attitude, and I wanted those folks.
An angry jury.
An
What's
angry
that?
jury.
Just people that are...
Somebody that might just be maybe hot-tempered, that kind of thing. And it depends on the strategy that you're trying to do for the case that you're looking for. And that comes to play in any case. And so when you're trying to look for certain characteristics, as you're looking across that jury panel, you're trying to pick people that might fit your strategy for the case.
Do you ever want just a calm jury?
Yes, absolutely. Sometimes you want a real thinking jury, someone that's going to really think through the process. Other times you want to go to emotion. So it depends on what the attorney is looking for. Are they trying to get a thoughtful jury? Are they trying to get an emotional jury? What are they looking for?
What are some of the do's and don'ts as a juror?
Well, do's and don'ts. First of all, we need you to show up. That's number one. Because again, we have a third of our juries not showing up. A third of our jurors not showing up, and we need to change that. We need to get people to show up.
And do you think that's statewide? That's not just indicative of Lancaster County, but all of the Susquehanna Valley?
It is. It is up to a third in many counties, and many people don't know the consequences for not showing up. So if you want me to talk about that, I'm certainly happy to do it.
We'll talk more about that, but back to do's and don'ts.
Sure.
Let's talk do's.
So do's, we want you there on time, looking dressed appropriately, ready to go, ready to listen. Don'ts are that doggone cell phone. The cell phone gets people in trouble. You have a right to chat about things in your life, and we want people to do that. We want people to take photographs of things in their lives, but not in the courtroom. Cell phones, absolutely in the courtroom. People cannot communicate about the case, and they can't receive information about the case. That's absolutely prejudicial, and it can't happen.
All right, we'll keep that thought. We'll talk more about
Very good.
what you can't do as a juror.
This is WGAL 8 in Focus, coverage you can count on.
Judge Jeffrey Conrad has been on the bench since 2018 in the Lancaster County Court of Common Pleas. We were talking about jurors and what they can and can't do. They can bring cell phones in.
So if you're coming into the courthouse for most any proceeding, you may not bring your cell phone in. If you do, you need to place it in a locker. However, if you're being called in as a juror, you may take it along down to the jury lounge with you, and you may use it prior to being called up to the courtroom. However, if you're called up to the courtroom, you may not bring it up there, and then there's a whole myriad of rules that go along with what you may not do with your cell phone. You may not receive information about the case. You may not broadcast about the case until your time as a juror is concluded. At that point, you go back to your full First Amendment rights. You may do whatever you want to with that information. But prior to that, you may not get any or receive any information about the case from outside of the courtroom.
Are people, it seems like they always ask them, how much do you know about this case? Have you read about it? Have you seen it on TV?
Right.
Does that automatically strike you if you know something about a case?
It may or may not, depending on how much you know. So if a juror were to be asked, do you know or have you read anything about this case? Yes, I have. Okay, well, now we go around and question that juror and say, well, what do you know about it? And once we find out about how much information they have, we would say then, could you listen to that information, knowing what you know? Could you set that aside and still be fair and impartial? And if they indicate that they could, then they may remain on the jury. If they say that they cannot be fair and impartial, at that point they'd be struck for cause.
Are jurors allowed to take notes in Lancaster County and elsewhere?
Yeah, they certainly may. The law changed some years ago, and jurors may take notes. And I always tell people, you're welcome to take notes. You're welcome not to take notes. You're welcome to doodle if you'd like. But your notes are only a memory aid. That's all it is. You need to rely on your own recollection.
And speaking of notes, obviously there are also media members often in the courtroom. How do you react to that?
Well, I like having the media in the courtroom. I think it's great because I want our citizens to know what's going on in the courtroom. It's very important. Now in Pennsylvania, we do not have cameras in Pennsylvania, but anyone is welcome to visit as a citizen to come in and watch, and to have the members of the press to come in. We want you in there so people can know what's going on in their courthouse.
We're often the only eyes and ears that people might have there.
I'd like to see the courthouse. I'd like to see the courtroom full of people. Unfortunately, we don't get that many, but we do get school groups from time to time, and people that want to come in, and I love them being in there, so the accountability is there, and people can see that justice is being done in their courts.
How does that work? I mean, people watch TV, so maybe they could go see the real thing.
Anytime. We're welcome to have you in. Come on in anytime, and it's always open, and you can always call court administration to find out, what events are going on in the courthouse that day, or look at the website, and folks can come in and watch anything.
It is sometimes a very intimidating scene, isn't it? For not only for the jurors, but for witnesses and even for the plaintiffs and defendants.
It's where justice happens, and there's friction where justice happens, and I love being a part of it. And it can be very emotional. I mean, some of the content that we have, we do screen for people who would have emotional difficulties with certain subject matter. So if you have someone who may be the victim of abuse, domestic abuse, and we have a case coming up like that, we would ask someone about that and bring them up to sidebar to talk with the juror quietly and privately about that so the rest of the panel can't hear. And if it would be that they have such an emotional response that they could not be fair and impartial, they may be excused for cause for that reason.
Explain that sidebar. People hear that term. What does that mean?
When we talk about talking openly in the courtroom, anybody can hear. But what we do many times is have a sidebar where we invite folks up past the bar, where only attorneys can come past, up to the judge's bench, where we have a private conversation where no one else can hear, to make sure that no one's privacy interests are violated, and people feel comfortable telling us why they can't serve in this capacity.
And everything in the courtroom is recorded. I don't mean recording, but still by a court reporter.
Right, everything is transcribed. So it's all there to make sure things are being done fairly. And I can tell you this also, if we do have a case where it's of such a nature that it may have an emotional effect on a juror, we even have counseling set aside. People can now qualify for three sessions of counseling to help them, deal with what they just saw in the courtroom.
And I know there are victim witness advocates also often in the courtroom.
Truly, they're needed. Again, it's where the rubber meets the road, and things are challenging. Civil cases can have very graphic testimony and evidence. Criminal cases, again, you can have some very graphic testimony and evidence, and it's part of the screening that we do with jurors to make sure they can handle it. And then if they did go through something traumatic and they need some counseling about it, they can do that as well.
Interesting. But it really is it's so great to see, I think, as a reporter who's been in the courtroom a lot of times. It's really
we like having you in there,
Yeah,
we like that.
It's fascinating to watch. So stay with us. We'll talk about some of your highlights of what you've seen in the courtroom.
This is WGAL 8 in Focus, coverage you can count on.
We continue our conversation with Judge Jeffrey Conrad, who's a sitting judge with the Lancaster County Court of Common Pleas. As a judge, how much interaction do you have with the jury on a daily basis when they're there?
Yeah, it's interesting, the relationship that develops over the course of a trial. The jury is really looking to you for direction and to keep things moving along. And I try to make sure the courtroom keeps moving so people know that we're not wasting their time. Sometimes if you're a court TV junkie, you'll see sometimes where these long delays and long lags. We want to get to it. We want to make proper use of people's time. So we try to move that courtroom, getting the parties in there, getting the attorneys in there so we keep things moving along.
Do you ever have to reprimand some of the jury members?
Oh yeah, I mean there's that too. I mean sometimes you have a juror member that doesn't want to show up on time. We have to you have to get here on time. That's the expectation. And the other thing is to make sure that people follow the rules. You may not send these any transmissions out on your cell phone or receive any information, and we try to make that very important because the only information that a jury can rely on is that which they heard in the courtroom. Sometimes jurors think they can be a super sleuth and do their own investigation. No, it's improper, and we don't want people doing that. But if I ask you a question about a lead singer in a rock band, the first thing you do is look at your phone. Well, that's all well and
You're
good.
You're going to Google it, right?
Right. In the private sector, that's okay, but in the courtroom, we may not do that. And breaking people of that habit is very important, and sometimes harder to get people to do than you think.
I believe it. I imagine some cases are tougher than others. Obviously, cases involving sexual assault, involving children, and you've certainly had all of those, haven't you?
Seen it all in that regard. And children, and we talk about justice. Justice is a sweet thing to watch, and it comes out the other end of a jury trial. One way or the other, at least it's justice. We know it to be right. The other thing I think is very important is that it can come in all flavors. We had a child in a custody case one time, little 5-year-old child. Mom and dad fighting over who should have most custody of this child. Back in chambers, we interviewed the child. And the child, at one point, I asked him about what's it like at mom's house? What's it like at dad's house? And ultimately, who would you like to live with more?
Oh, that's tough. Tough question, right?
5-year-old child leans back in his chair, gospel truth, puts his finger like this and says, "Let me think." He thought for a second. He said, "I think I'd ask God." Oh, tore us up. Went out on the record, told the parents what the child had to say. Mom started crying. Dad started crying. The attorneys wanted a recess. They went outside and they worked it out. No need to have a trial.
Wow. Well, you probably loved that outcome.
That's a great outcome. But justice comes in all different sizes and shapes. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that people are treated fairly and justly in our courtrooms. And I think we do a very good job here in Pennsylvania doing that.
At the end of the day, do you always feel that justice has been served in a trial?
I will tell you something, that I think our jury process is amazing. Sure, there are outliers in our system, but that system gets it right. They get it right. The 12 people, as they sit down and think about it, they contemplate, they think, and they come out right. I mean, they get it right.
Do you often think how they're going to, what the verdict's going to be, and how often do you agree with their outcome?
It's very interesting. It's very interesting because, again, I'm looking at it from my perspective. They're looking at it from their perspective as they're supposed to do. I may have more insight sometimes than what they have. And so one way or the other, we all try to think who might be the verdict winner, but I think the jury gets it right every time.
So you often agree with their verdict.
Yeah, you bet.
Now, you've been on all sides of the courtroom, defense attorney and prosecution, and now on the bench. What's that like to see all sides of the courtroom?
I really think it's a marvelous perspective. Having been a prosecutor and learning how to build a case, having been a defense attorney and learning how to deconstruct a case, and then being in front of various judges around the various jurisdictions and seeing what it looks like in their courtrooms and what I expect to see in my courtroom. So I love it. I love to do it. I love to try to ensure justice every day, and I love to treat people well when they come in my courtroom and make sure that people get a good outcome.
Yeah, and that's not only jurors, but the witnesses and
everybody.
Yeah, and all the attorneys that you have to deal with.
If you walk in that courtroom, the system brought you to me, and we're going to make sure you're taken care of. That's how it's going to be.
But there can be a lot of drama in the courtroom.
Oh, yes. Yeah, we have people that certainly act up, and when they act up in the courtroom, we have our deputies in there, and our deputies are there to make sure that everybody's good boys and good girls in the courtroom. And from time to time, those dedicated deputies do their job. And I think that's the other thing for people to notice: you'll be safe. If you come in as a juror in our courtroom or our courthouse, you're going to be safe while you're there. And our people, our deputy sheriffs, will make sure that happens.
We've heard a lot about judges coming under, violent attacks in some cases around the country.
Been threatened myself, yes.
Really?
Yes.
How so?
Well, it's people don't like the outcome sometimes, or they don't want to show up for court. So we get, from time to time, you'll get threats to come into the courthouse, sometimes directed personally, sometimes directed at the entire bench. We work with the state officials to try to watch out for that. And it's a scary thing, but I think ultimately we're all called to do the job, and I think we're all dedicated to the job, and nothing's going to stop us. No threat's going to stop us. We're going to do it. So don't bother going that route. Get yourself into the courthouse. Let's do justice.
Well, justice served. Thank you, Judge. Really interesting. Obviously, you're very
pleasure.
passionate about your work you're doing. Thank you. Thank you for joining us for WGAL 8 in Focus. For all of us at WGAL, I'm Susan Shapiro. Join us again next Sunday morning at 11 for WGAL 8 in Focus, right after NBC's Meet the Press. And you can watch each episode of In Focus, plus WGAL's latest newscasts, original programming, and more. Just download the Very Local app and stream for free on Roku and Amazon Fire TV.